All right, so it's my privilege to introduce you guys to John Burns and to Wayne Smith from Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo has done a great job of implementing IPv6 within their network, and it's another one of those great success stories, right? One of the major themes in this conference this year has been putting IPv6 to work, and we've really tried to showcase some really great scenarios where people have been successful deploying IPv6 and finding some rocky roads in the middle. And certainly Wells Fargo is going to talk a little bit about that today. So I'd like to introduce John Burns. John is a network engineer and architect with over 20 years of experience in designing and deploying large-scale networks at financial institutions, and that's no small task, as you all know. These include First Union, Wachovia, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo. He currently leads the design for secure connectivity and network foundational services within the infrastructure architecture team at Wells Fargo. He includes in his role as lead architect for IPv6. He holds CCIE 2357, so he's been there for a long, long time, and has served on the Cisco IPv6 Deployment Council and Enterprise Technical Advisory Board, and the IEEE Communications Quarterly Quality and Reliability Working Group. Wayne Smith, who's also going to be talking today, is a senior vice president in the network engineering at Wells Fargo. He serves as the executive sponsor for the IPv6 program, so when the buck has to stop somewhere, he's the guy. Prior to joining the network engineering in April of 2013, he served as the availability manager for the firm. He's been with Wells Fargo or Wachovia since November of 2007. Wayne previously spent 11 years at JP Morgan Chase, including at Bank One in operation management roles across multiple technology disciplines, including infrastructure operations, workload automation, production assurance, and program management. His IT career began at Abbott Laboratories, where he spent 16 years specializing in business continuity, disaster recovery, and information security. Guys, welcome.
Good morning, everyone. We're very pleased to be here, and at the risk of sounding repetitive, I want to personally thank the Rocky Mountain Task Force also for putting on such a great event where we can come and share best practices and ideas, war stories, and just generally encourage and support each other on this IPv6 journey. As Dan mentioned, I stepped into my role in April of last year, and my first official act as I was transitioning from my last role to this one was to come to this event. And so, not being a person who grew up in the network discipline, my head was spinning when I left here. It is spinning less these days, but I consider this an invaluable forum for industry experts to come together and promote IPv6. So I add my thanks and congratulations to the other speakers. So our intention today is to give you a very brief profile of Wells Fargo as a business, not all of our financials and lines of business necessarily, but just enough to give you an idea of the scale of the journey that we're on. And this says it's our IPv6 journey. I would call it our journey thus far because we're still very much in progress and will be for several years to come. And then I'm going to turn over to John to take a chronological walk through roughly 2009 up until now. So if you're located in the United States, I'm assuming that you've heard of Wells Fargo as a business. We do operate across a broad spectrum of financial services, roughly 80 distinct lines of business, and one of 3 households in America does some kind of business with Wells Fargo. We have a very large domestic footprint as well as a presence in 35 countries internationally. At a glance, we are the 4th largest bank in North America in terms of asset base, but we're number 1 in market capitalization in the world. At the end of yesterday, that was around $282 billion. So a very large enterprise. over 250,000 employees worldwide, 70 million customers across the spectrum, more than 9,000 locations. That includes roughly 6,500 branches or stores, as we call them, 12,500 ATMs. And in terms of the technology infrastructure, just a few fun facts here. We have roughly 1 million IPv4 addresses in use, over 35,000 routers and switches, thousands of load balancers and firewalls on top of that. Our remote workforce, our VPN, is 30,000 plus on any given day and is sized for roughly triple that amount. And as I mentioned, we're in 35 countries around the world, represented by 90 distinct sites at this point. We also have 7 core data centers, major data centers, and roughly 100 regional and satellite data centers. So that's a very brief overview just to give you a sense of scale. And as Dan mentioned in the intro, JB is our lead architect on the IPv6 journey. I just want to personally acknowledge him because he has been a tireless advocate and evangelist for IPv6 for 5+ years at least, and he bears a lot of the responsibility and for where we are as a company on our journey thus far. So JB.
Thanks, appreciate that. I got to say, by the way, coming here, one of the biggest traction we get for sending people out here is to come back with the errand stickers. Even our CIO says, oh yeah, bring me back a sticker. So if you're trying to figure out how to get V6 going in your company, bring back stickers, start handing them out, and people will start coming to you saying, hey, I want one of those stickers, what do I got to do? Then you can say, just turn on V6 and I'll give you a sticker. So I've got a whole stack of them I'm taking back. So want to kind of just take you very quickly chronologically through kind of what we've been doing in the hopes that some of you may say, oh, okay, I could apply that same thought process to how to get this going, particularly in the enterprise space. As was mentioned earlier, there's a lot of resistance, and Wells Fargo in some ways is no more interested in IPv6 than anyone else, right? We're a bank where we want to make money on transactions. We really don't care about technology to some extent. So it's been interesting to see how do you get that traction, what leads you there. So if we crank back 3, 4, even 5 years ago, I remember going to training in 1999 when this first came out. This is back when ATM was big and LANE and PNNI and all these other technologies. We're just all learning all of this and thinking, wow, this will be really interesting. And then it just went dark. For 10 years, it just wasn't there. And it really didn't get back on my radar screen in a big way until we did this merger of Wells Fargo and Wachovia in about 2008-9, the big unpleasantness, some of you may recall, the downturn. So as we did that, we looked at the two networks and we said, how much address space do we need to put these two together? And when we added up everything we had in use, put in some of the inefficiency coefficients you get, like, you can't assign 5 addresses, it's 4 or 8 or 16, and then looked at growth space, we said, well, we need about 1.3 Class A's, right, to have some reasonable growth space. So right at that point, we sort of said, okay, this is a major problem, not having a ton of registered space, RFC 1918 being 1.1 or less of a Class A. So even at that time, some of the very high up said, oh, so what is the right answer? We said V6 is the right answer. And they said, great, can we do that as part of the merger? And we said, no, absolutely not. It's a great idea. We'd love to be able to. We haven't tested anything. This is back in 2009. We're still a Windows XP shop, et cetera. There's just no way in a merger you'd even try to take that on. But it got on our radar screen, and we said, why don't we start a working group to just watch this and be thinking about how would we get to, yes, you can do this. And one of the takeaways I'd say from that is it takes a while to get that traction. You got to start bringing the coalition of the willing together and let them think and get this in their heads, and then they'll get some energy and going. You can't just drop a bunch of people in a room one day and say, believe in V6, go, and have them run out saying, yes, I'm now converted. It seems to take some time. What we did find is a lot of the lead engineers were interested. So if you said, I'm going to have a meeting on V6, will you show up? They'd say, yeah, okay, I'll come, and what do you got to show me? So we really started just tracking what is the industry putting out, and a lot of it was the white papers The presentations coming out of forums like this, we just go through them on our own and look at it and say, what do we think? We started doing the Aaron countdown and the IANA countdowns. Let's make little blocks of all the V6 or the V4, /8s and see when they get filled in and kind of watch this progression. So that was very helpful up front. I think by now you can shortcut some of that, but there's still, I think there's a very helpful way in a corporation to get some traction is get just the people who are interested and willing to start meeting regularly and build some synergies on this and get them thinking about it and sort of promulgating that out a bit. It was really when the IANA, February 3rd, 2011, that's really when we said, okay, we got to start taking this up to leaders and we need to start doing something about this. This is a pretty good industry call. All of a sudden, the consulting firms are starting to write white papers. Gartner saying now this matters, and Price Waterhouse and all these other people are saying it now matters. Now we can get the CIO to listen and take this a little more seriously. So that really got us thinking about why should we really care and how do you frame this up? And the overall takeaway I would say is don't just pick one. There's multiple reasons this is important, and the emphasis will shift over time. So, for example, yes, eventually the customer won't be able to connect at all, or more likely the customer will have a degraded experience. That's a real big one for the business. But today they look at that and say, well, I don't see that yet, right? No one's telling me horror stories that I couldn't log into Wells Fargo and it didn't work. We have put a lot of monitoring in place to track that. We can actually track the performance of V4 versus V6 and C. Just to be clear, we do not have wellsfargo.com V6 enabled yet. We're getting very close. We'll talk a little more about why that is hard to get done. But we are monitoring and measuring V6 connections coming in and seeing what the response time would be. So that's one that we can watch that one, and that has a lot of business sort of shock value. But that's a hard sell right now to say, oh yeah, you're in imminent danger that people won't be able to connect and do business with you. It's more, eventually they're going to have problems. Part of what we get equal interest from is we do a lot with the IP address as part of our fraud and analytics. And so to say you're going to start losing visibility and if they do use a V6 address, you're not going to get anything, that gets the attention of a whole different group. The fraud side and that side of the house is different than the front end line of business making the money. And so you get a different set of people into the conversation. That tends to be an area that the flashlight has not been shown that much in those dark corners. So we're finding that a lot of the vendors that make those systems have been pretty slow to get ready for IPv6. And that goes all the way to the geolocators. If any of you are geolocators, please tell me you can geolocate better than just country. That's all I'm seeing so far from most of the main ones is, yeah, you're in the United States and I'll put you right in the middle of the country. That's unacceptable, right? For us, we got to be able to geolocate you down to a city, a state, something. So if you're not and you want to start a business, become a geolocator for V6. Probably a good business opportunity right now, so go for that one. So this is actually one of our biggest limitations right now that we're having to solve to be able to get all of our internet-facing properties up is to solve the fraud and analytics and things that are IP address driven. The exhaustion one is one that's now suddenly playing a lot more for us because, again, we're a very large company. This isn't going to resonate for small and medium-sized business, but for any large enterprise, you're going to have the same problems. You use a ton of address space, you're growing rapidly, lots of new things coming in. Where are you getting the space from, right? If you're not going to do registered, you're not going to do RFC 1918, then you're either going to do squat space and just steal other people's space, or you're going to move to V6. That's the only answers you can come to. And we're actually finding it's very helpful to try to apply the same exhaustion policies that Aaron has on the internal side and kind of do that. Hey, we're at phase 1 of depletion, phase 2 of depletion. It gets people ready that something's going to happen. And then when you come back and you say, remember when we told you 2 years ago we were going to hit phase 3, we just hit it today. They sort of go, yeah, okay, let me get the checkbook out. That's right, you told me this was coming, as opposed to walking in one day and saying, okay, we just ran out of addresses, now do something. So we're trying to incorporate a lot of the same internet exhaustion methodologies and mindset into what's going on inside Wells Fargo. We do see some of the regulatory requirements, and I'm personally happy that the government made it, written into the contracts and the terms of conditions for things, and we do business with the government where that's part of the contract, and so the business understands that. If a customer comes to us and says, to win my business, you must do V6, that's a big motivator. We don't see a lot of that, and I'm really curious why we don't see that from any other countries. I've been pushing a lot on the people that do business development, say, hey, what's the Canadian government telling you? What's the Indian government? There's a few sort of watered down mandate statements and plans. The U.S. government appears to be the only one actually taking a hard stand. So if any of you knows of other governments or other businesses who are writing this into their business contracts, you must do V6 or I will not use you, let me know, because we're always fishing for that. We want to make sure we don't miss that. Wayne will talk a little bit more about our methodology for tracking that. And then finally, as Wayne said, we do have a huge workforce that's remote all around the world. So if they can't connect back to Wells Fargo, if our VPN is not working on a T-Mobile device because it's 464XLAT and our driver doesn't work with that or whatever, that's a significant problem for us. And I have heard anecdotally from some of you that, yeah, I had some person end up in like a hotel in China and all they were getting was a V6 address. So we only have anecdotal data for us that says that's happening, but we're doing a lot of work. So for example, I do VPN from using V6 from home. I did it from here to prove that it works here on my iPhone. So yes, the V6 is working for at least a VPN connection. But we also have a lot of partners that might use their own kind of technology to connect to us. We provide the back end. They have their own front end. So there's a lot of interest there. So all of these areas resonate with different places in the business. They're all important. You probably could come up with your own set, but I just encourage you, don't pick one thing and say, this is the one reason we need V6. There's a lot of different reasons, and tailor that to your company. So, having hit this exhaustion, saying to leadership we need to take it seriously, they sort of said, okay, we agree with you, let's do an assessment. And it was recommended, and we wholeheartedly agreed to bring in someone from the outside to do the assessment so that you get that focus, some expertise, and a time-bounded deliverable, because you can drag on forever waiting for data and trying to get different people to bring their pieces to you. So what we did with that is, let's look at the marketplace. What are our peers and competitors doing? What's the stats on the internet? Let's look at all of our infrastructure, all of our applications. What does the capability appear to be on paper? Right. So on paper, Microsoft says Windows 7 does V6. So for now, we'll call that good enough. Right. Let's go look at what would that timeline be to enable it? How much are we going to charge to do that? What kind of an investment would it take? And kind of pull all that together and put that in front of the executive and say, here you are. So we did it in 14 weeks by bringing in a consulting firm that had some experience and a laser focus on getting this done. You have to cut a few corners. It's not a perfect assessment. Again, you're taking vendors' statements at face value. What we really learned from that is it was enormously powerful and enormously scary to do an analysis like that, because you look at everything that has an address. So you look at every application, every device, and you find that there's repositories all over the place. There's not one master thing, at least not for Wells Fargo and a company as large as we are. So you're stitching together all this data. You're finding really interesting correlations. You're finding gap areas that no one even knew we had this thing over here because some group had just done it. So it's been very useful just to understand how our IT works. I've learned more by doing this project than the last 20 years in large enterprise just dealing with the onesie-twosie projects. It's so encompassing. So I'd encourage you, for nothing else, get involved in the V6 project. You'll learn so much about the environment. The scary side is once you assemble all that together, it's a hacker's dream to have all that data. Every system I have, every version of everything. So we quickly distributed again and said, okay, that's it. We're not going to hold this data anymore. It goes back to its systems of record. We'll work to stitch it on the formal channels. But this is just too sensitive to keep all in one place. The security importance goes up the more expansive the data is. So that was an interesting finding. I hadn't quite expected that at the beginning, that I'd sit at the data going, oh my gosh, this is too much to look at. So that was the approach that we took, and kind of what came out of that was, yes, there should be a big focus on what the internet is doing and being ready for the internet, because it's the only one you can put a really good timeline and driver to, right? You can say adoption rate is going at this. Our customers, 5% are connecting on V6 or are capable, 10%, 15%, you can project it out. You can project out our own internal exhaustion a little bit, but that's trickier because it depends on the pace of technology adoption inside Wells Fargo, and that kind of goes in starts and fits. So that's kind of led us to saying, yeah, there should be a lot of focus in that area of the network. That also then starts giving you proven models of how to do things that you can use elsewhere. So for example, the way I build a DMZ, I use a lot of the same routing and switching components that I use in a data center. If I've certified it in a DMZ environment, I can then use that same set of configurations and code, et cetera, in the internal data center or even in a retail store or something. We definitely came away with the idea that we want to keep evaluating this over time. But we have to pick sort of, some time window to look at. So let's say over the next 3 to 5 years, what things are going to be the most impacted by this, and prioritize them that way. And we'll show you a little more of how we're kind of managing that going forward, because obviously you pick a point in time, but you have to keep up with all the applications that are going to come in the door over the next 3 or 4 years, right? We don't just stop, freeze everything until we're moved to V6 and then start up again. So we're having to have processes to make sure we keep up as new applications come in, or other ones get retired. There's then be an application that today doesn't do V6. If we're going to phase it out in 2 years, do I really want to work to get it V6 enabled? No, I'll just let it go. So picking some kind of a time window you want to work with is an interesting trick. Do you want to do a 3-year view, a 5-year view? What a lot of people seem to do is one technology life cycle. Unfortunately, for a large enterprise, I got different life cycles for everything. Applications may be on a 10-year, servers may be on 3-year, network might be on 5-year. It really varies. So there's not one harmonic convergence that I can align everything to. We also found that it was very helpful to take a risk-based view of this. That works well for financial firms, to say, what are the risks of either adopting V6, not adopting V6, and look at that from different perspectives, because a lot of people can relate to that. They have processes for documenting risk, for managing risk, for addressing risk, that if you just say, well, it's just a technology thing you need, they don't know what to do with that. When you say it's a risk, it's a compliance risk, or it's a scalability risk or something, a whole new team jumps in and goes, oh, risk, I know how to talk about risk. Great, now we're getting somewhere. So that's been very helpful for us. That may or may not translate at a university maybe or something, but certainly for large enterprise, I think that's a language that a lot of people understand. So kind of showing you what the output of that assessment looked like. We took the infrastructure and broke it into a series of sort of blocks, voice, video, security, whatever. You decide what taxonomy works for your environment. Break it into that. And what we rated it on was, okay, so what is the likelihood that V6 is going to be required in the near term? So where is there a driver that we can point to? The internet's doing it. It's being demanded as part of this, RFI or something. What is the existing capability of that infrastructure? So server running Linux 5.x, pretty good capability. Server running Windows NT, pretty bad capability, right? So kind of look at it from that perspective. And then from an execution risk, how hard is this going to be to do? Has someone else already done this? Is this sort of a proven thing? Are we going to be the first to do it? And have we sort of been expecting to do this? Did we budget for this? Did we plan? Was this already on someone's radar screen? So maybe it's a storage system. The vendor says, I think I might support V6, but you would be the first customer, and they have no plans to touch it. There's a pretty high execution risk. If it's F5 load balancers facing the internet, and F5 says, sure, we got 50 customers already doing this, you just want standard 6-to-4 translation, you're already running the right code, much lower execution risk. So we kind of scored it across all of these three, then did the same thing for software. And so again, you have to come up with a taxonomy. How do you want to break down your software? You want to say, presentation, application, database. We came up with, I think, 9 different layers that were, things like web and app servers is a group, systems monitoring and management. And just kind of went through all of those and made qualitative statements about that, where we stand. And this is a way to kind of shrink all the data down. That's another thing we learned. When you try to present this to executives, you can't go through all the infrastructure I have and try to show them a report of that. Even the graphs that show all the kinds of routers I have is beyond them. Even one graph saying all routers is too much for the CIO. You have to say all of network is, on a 1 through 10 is a 7, or, on these 3 areas is this. And we certainly found that wherever you said risk high, their attention instantly goes to that and goes, okay, that's the one. Of all the things you're showing me, the one that says high risk, tell me we're going to do something about that. So there's a lot to be learned in how you work your own corporation in terms of the language that makes sense and resonates with the leaders. We found applications was harder to figure out how to really get your hands around that. Infrastructure is kind of binary. It's an F5 LTM model, blah, blah, blah. Yes, it does, or no, it doesn't. Online banking is an application. It's a set of different services, et cetera. Very hard to do a quick answer on that. So what we did is took the chief architects, got them together by line of business, and looked at, okay, how important is the application to Wells Fargo, and then what is the likelihood that it's going to be impacted by V6? So something like online banking, very high likelihood. Something like my internal contact center application, lower likelihood. and use that to kind of plot. We played a lot with, let's try to just plot every little dot. No, that doesn't make any sense. Let's try to do big circles. That doesn't make sense. We eventually came up with something that Wayne will show you that I think works better now to translate to that business. But we ended up with sort of these broad plots of, okay, here's your top applications in terms of the business value to the bank, and then the likelihood that V6 is going to impact them. Those are the ones we need to be talking about. Let's bubble up, which ones is that, and then, relative to each other, these are the lines of business that have the most applications that fall into this area. So line of business number 2 here must have a lot of internal facing systems that don't have a lot of pressure. Line of business 4 must have a lot of public internet facing things. Line of business 1, maybe not so many websites, but they're really high value websites. Maybe it's trading systems and things like that. So that's kind of the approach that we took. The other thing we then realized is, okay, we seriously want to plan and execute this, so we have to have a program to do that. We're not going to be able to just do this by the goodness of the technical guys that get in a room. We don't necessarily want to retain a consulting firm for the next 5 years to manage this, over that life cycle. So that led to a request for dedicated resources, a significant number of dedicated resources to stand up this program and run this. And that's where Wayne comes in. So I will turn it back to him.
Okay, so once executive management was convinced this is important enough for us to do something about and put some energy and some funding behind it, we knew that we had to put a structure in place that would get their attention and keep it and keep them engaged, because as you know, this is, especially in an enterprise our size, a long, slow, methodical, painstaking endeavor, and in the midst of other more urgent, more crushing, more seemingly immediate needs, it's easy for this to slide onto the back burner in people's minds. So we put together what is a pretty standard program governance structure. And in the top right there, you see the executive steering committee is made up of our head of technology and operations, who is a direct report to the chairman and CEO. So we're high up in the organization at this point. Most of his directs, head of infrastructure, head of security and availability, head of applications, operational risk, audit, all of those internal thought leaders and influencers that we knew we would need in our corner when the going got tough. In a company our size, in a company of any size, you're always going to have competition for 3 scarce resources: time, talent, and treasure, right? You're always going to have other competition or other initiatives that are taking people's time away, and the associated funding and the time frame that they're working within. So we knew that we would have to have these people plugged in when we started to hit hurdles or pushback, that we could have an escalation path. This slide says that we meet biannually. It's actually semi-annually, so twice a year we get with that forum. The IPv6 Operating Committee is more of a mid to senior level. I'll call them divisional leaders, so people that own things like storage or desktop or movers and shakers in the data center arena, that we really want to have a consistent bidirectional dialogue so that they can hear from us, here's where the program is currently focused, and we can hear back from them things that we need to be aware of, places where we need to be pushing harder or backing off, so that they act as our eyes and ears and advocates in their respective divisions. And we obviously are advocating to push IPv6 forward as quickly as possible. Then you have the program sponsor, that would be me, so I'm accountable for periodic updates to both of these forums, and we cover things like typical stuff, progress, hurdles, risks, financials, all of those things to keep that on their radar. Then where the rubber really meets the road is in the working group, and these 3 work streams below. So the working group is made up of the program team that's actually executing the day-to-day operations of the program. We have it broadly split out into infrastructure enablement, line of business, which read that as application enablement, and then program support, which is all the support functions around analytics and metrics, so that, as JB said, it's very hard to go to executive leadership and frame something this complex. So the degree to which we can simplify the message but make it very digestible but powerful at the same time is very valuable. So we are investing time in metrics and analytics to put that story together. Communications, we do a lot to sort of get IPv6 into the cultural DNA of the business, so that when people hear that, oh yeah, I've heard of that, I know what that might mean to me. We leverage the corporate intranet to publish periodic articles. We have a program site on the intranet where we publish industry-specific articles and access to training and things like that. And just any forum that we can get in, whether it's chief application architects or operational risk or anyone who voices an interest in learning more about IPv6, we're out there evangelizing. We also, we've heard a lot about training over the past couple of days. We definitely are all over that. We try to pace it and time it so that you don't have the use it or lose it phenomenon happening. But we've put probably 300 plus people through training at this point. Some of it's intro to IPv6, some of it's geared directly toward network engineers or information security practitioners, so it's role specific. And then of course we have program governance stuff that has to be managed, as well as the financial piece of things. So John talked a little bit about drivers before, and like all businesses, we are a provider of products and services, and we're also a buyer of products and services. So we knew that from the start it was important to bake that into our thinking. And I'll start on the buy side. Obviously we buy a ton of hardware and software from external suppliers to feed our tech infrastructure, and we knew that we had to get out in front of the natural organic tech refresh cycles that happen in the business and make sure that our supply chain folks who are out dealing, the vendor managers that are dealing with the suppliers, that we could start making sure that IPv6 compliance was one of the mandatory variables for continuing to do business with those suppliers. So we worked with supply chain and with legal on the RFI, RFQ type documentation to put legal language in there requiring IPv6 compliance or a very tangible plan to get there in a short period of time. That was like passing a law through Congress. That took multiple meetings, multiple touch points and reviews and edits and levels of reviews, and literally took, 9 months or so to get that really into place. But it's there now, so we have sort of a front door that nothing comes into the shop that is not IPv6 compliant. Now, of course, we don't take that at face value. We still do testing and certification, but knowing that we're in good shape up front is helpful. On the sell side, obviously we're interested in what our peer FIs are doing, the Citis and JP Morgans and Bank of Americas and all the rest. We have a vested interest in a healthy financial sector that we're a part of, right? But we also want to know from a competitive standpoint, are we at or ahead or behind them? And that's very significant to our executive leadership. They definitely want to know that. What are our peers doing? How do we stack up against them? So we lever that to meet our goals as often as we possibly can. Customer IPv6 adoption. We'll see a slide in a little bit that shows the traffic on our public website, and we know a lot of that is powered by things like mobility, and that's where IPv6 is coming out of the box with new devices. We also, are there products and services that are enabled only by IPv6 that are not available in IPv4? We don't know yet, but as we're working with our businesses, we want to say, this is the future of the internet. So if our goal is to help our customers meet their financial needs and help them succeed financially, then we want to be on the cutting edge of being able to provide every product and service that we can. And as JB likes to say, if you're not on IPv6, you're not on the whole internet. So this shows a little bit about how we have chosen to march forward. It's kind of as you can see, this didn't translate over perfectly, but you can see it's sort of a phased, overlapping adoption in different chunks of our infrastructure space. We started in the DMZ arena for reasons that should be obvious. The public internet-facing stuff is, we think, the most relevant for the kind of change that we're making here. And so that includes the network and security stack, and we've been at that basically since the beginning of the program, so roughly May of last year. We are making good progress in that space. We have a pretty rigorous testing and certification and enablement process that we go through, and we're making good headway there. We can talk about that a little later if we have time. We are also moving into the data center space, and the compute platforms, the server environment, the backbone network, et cetera. And then, lastly, we'll start in the end user and access space. We took this approach for several reasons. Before I talked about the competition for those 3 scarce resources, so that had a lot to do with it. We just don't physically have enough people to spread across all of that at once. Cost. One of the marching orders from the very beginning was, unless there was a specific business driver that was pushing us to refresh equipment to enable IPv6, we would let those organic processes do the work for us. So there's some of that into play. And then part of it is we're a bank, so we're risk averse by nature. And to introduce that much change that fast in our environment is just really not practical from the standpoint of risk management. Considerations like change windows, just things like that caused us to kind of take a stair-stepped approach. Here's the graph I was referring to earlier. This shows IPv6 capable devices hitting our public website. And you can plainly see it's a couple months out of date here, but it tracks along with some of the industry statistics we saw yesterday. And again, we think that's driven in a big way by mobility, because that is by far the fastest growing segment of our customer interface with the web channels. And so it's a 4% increase in terms of raw percentage points, but 50%, almost 50% off of that baseline number from where it was just 9 months or so ago. Yesterday, I can't remember if it was Alan that shared the potential from going to 9.6% to 25% in 1 year, and that was a little scary. But at the same time, the reason that we track this is to put it in front of our leadership and say, see, this is really happening, and we need to maintain the momentum that we have. There's no slide there. Okay, there is a slide missing. So, I'm not sure what happened. There's a slide missing. I'll try to paint this visually. So, John showed the graph with the crossbars showing the different LOBs, and the names are obscured because of, disclosure rules and all that kind of thing. But while we've been tooling along in the infrastructure space, we knew that at some point this is going to become more of an application-centric endeavor. And so during this year, we have been conducting a survey using our application inventory as a baseline, and we ask a set of questions that basically reveal the exposure, if you will, and the complexity of adoption for a given application. So it's things like the parsing of IP addresses, third-party partner connections, the use of certain versions of Java or other middleware or OS code, things that will help us to gauge what is the potential exposure to the line of business. And out of that, what we've done is produce a kind of a stratified distribution of high, medium, low complexity, high, medium, low impact spread of applications, so that when we go to a CIO and say, you need to start thinking about IPv6 and plan for your portfolio to adopt it over the next X number of years, we can say, we've done some work to help you along. We know you own 500 applications, and based on the work we've done, these 25 are the ones that we think we should attack first, and we can explain why that is. And it kicks off the conversation in a much more constructive manner because they have a bit of a running start. We're just at the end of collecting the first wave of that data, and we're sifting through it right now and staging those conversations. In terms of where we go in the future, that's going to be a big part of it. We'll continue doing all of our infrastructure work, but the application engagement, the setting of timelines and milestones and testing criteria and all that stuff is still yet to come. So that's why I said it's our journey thus far. I'm going to bring John back up to tell you some things that we have learned along the way, and John, I'll let you lead off.
Great. So, sort of to wrap up, and we'll certainly take whatever questions you have, or you can catch us at lunch. The U.S. government actually really did a huge amount of work by making these mandates, by threatening vendors to stop buying their stuff. I mean, we owe them a debt of gratitude. Without them doing that, I don't think V6 would be anywhere near as far as it is. And I'm hoping that's the U.S. government having the wisdom to see we want the U.S. to lead this revolution and be a part of it. I'm constantly finding that a lot of people do want to reduce this to, it's just V4 with bigger addresses, it's tuba, if you will, and want to do things like, well, let's just take the V4 address, translate into hex, and map it in there, and that's my V6 addressing scheme. And so we're having to challenge that all the time and say, no, let's go read these papers. Let's go, Red Pill says, the V6 only data center. Look at this cool deck, and try to get people out of. There's that natural thing of, I don't know what to do, so let me just do what I know. That also leads us to saying, you got to get hands-on experience. You can read all the books you want, but take it into a lab, see what it's really doing. A great example, we let some of our lab guys go, and they brought up a server, and they said, holy cow, the server's getting 3 addresses, a DHCP one, a Slack one, and a static one. It's not supposed to do that. And we're like, well, no, actually, maybe it is supposed to. What do you think? Do you like that? No, we hate that. Okay, well, let's talk about it. What do you think we should do, right? That doesn't necessarily come out at you reading a book. So that hands-on is very important. And the whole relearning lessons, the ping of death in V4 that was conquered 10 years ago. Yes, it came back in V6 briefly. A lot of the vendors are not fully closing all the gaps in V6 that they found in V4, and so there's a constant need to kind of learn those things and go back to the vendors and go, you knew this. You knew about like parameter checking. Why did you not apply it to V6? This should not be that hard, but it is. The big thing I would say about that, our approach is we're not doing pilots, we're not doing proof of concepts, because in our mind that is, I try it and then I take it away, whatever. These are controlled introductions. When I turn it on, it's here for good, right? When I go to an ISP link and I turn on V6, that's not, well, we'll run it for 2 weeks and then back it out. No, it's on. And so as we roll through the infrastructure, that means having to make sure everyone's ready for it. All the tools can handle it. All the security things have been signed off. People have reviewed the plans, et cetera. So it is a foundational commitment, which is very different than a little skunk works. Well, I'll just turn it up over here. That takes more work up front, but it means when the train starts rolling, the train can go at the pace it wants to go. So once we had done that for one set of internet links, said, okay, cut the change controls, do the rest, and bang, bang, bang. They just march through all of them and turn it on. Now, along the way, they might find that a certain carrier doesn't support it on that PE or whatever. You have to go work through some gotchas. But for a large enterprise, it means you can see how to get through this whole thing because you've laid a very strong foundation versus trying to sort of interject it a little bit over here and hope it'll sort of naturally grow. So I'd encourage you to at least give that approach some thought versus let me just try to get a little bit over here and hope it'll catch on and grow. If you can work it foundationally into what you do, the commitment is there then to go the whole 10 yards and not lose traction in the middle.
Yeah, one thing I would add to that is building on small successes breeds confidence in both the team and in the leadership, because IPv6 enterprise-wide multi-year endeavor sounds big and scary and risky to especially to leadership. So one thing I failed to mention before, we have done a controlled introduction in a tiny sliver of outbound proxy traffic in one of our data centers, also inbound VPN traffic, and thirdly with a production application that deals with a third party for some image exchange stuff. So we have demonstrated successes that we can say, see, this worked, it didn't cause any problems. And all we have to do is replicate that model over and over throughout the environment. So while I have the mic, I would also add that, or reiterate, it's just incredibly important to keep up the marketing and promotion campaign, because again, in the what I call the tyranny of the urgent, running the day-to-day business, it's very easy to let this creep to the back burner in people's minds. So we have found that to be invaluable to keep building support. JB, I'll let you wrap up.
Yeah, so I think we'll move into questions in a minute. I'd just sort of add, again, this is going to take longer than you think. It's going to have surprises. We're still getting surprises and trying to figure out what to do with them. But at the end of the day, I think two things that really resonate with us. One is, okay, do you think the internet is more or less relevant to your business over time? And for us, it's clearly more and more relevant, right? We have a shifting demographic to using mobile devices. I mean, how many of you have, say, deposited a check using your mobile device? Taking a picture of a check and you didn't go to the ATM? That's huge, right? That means I don't need as many ATMs, but I need to support all the mobile devices out there. So that makes sense to leaders. They understand the internet is a bigger part of everything we do. And if that's going to be true, would you rather be driving that or reacting to it? You want to be part of it and help shape where it goes and maybe, mold it to what would be best for you? Or do you just want to wait and see what they give you and then try to fit into it? And so for us, that's obvious. We want to help drive it. We want to be part of where it goes. It's going to help Wells Fargo. It's going to help our customers. And at the end of the day, that's what our business model is. So that part is not that hard to sell. It's how do you get there? So hopefully this has been somewhat helpful to kind of show you how we broke the whole problem down and tried to stack it back together. And again, we're, all the chips are pushed in on this, but it's a long, long path to get there. One question a lot of people ask is, exactly, are you going to single stack, only dual stack? What are you doing? At the moment, everything is pretty much dual stack. We're starting to lean towards probably the access world would go V6 only first, because that's where the proven models are. That's where the Windows 7 is, et cetera, and the mobile devices that all have a V6 stack. When I get back into the data center, there's a lot of crazy ancient technologies, they're going to have a long, long path. So it's starting to seem more and more clear to us that to get the internal conversion done, get all the edge products certified, start evolving that to native 6 where possible, NAT 6.4, DNS 6.4 where needed, maybe even 464 XLAT or whatever. T-Mobile's got a great story about what they've done to try to get V4 addresses off of the end device. All of that seems to make a lot of sense to us. So at the moment, that's kind of how I think it's likely to play out for us. But we're early into that, working through things like Wins dependencies. If any of you know Windows or some of the other products that Microsoft's been trying to get rid of for 10 years, and they're finally drawing a line and saying, okay, it's never going to do v6, but we have a lot of commitment to that technology. What are you going to do with it? So I guess we'll just open up for any questions for the next 5 minutes. Got one right up front here.
Great presentation. Lots of great information. Very, very much appreciated. I have a question about, you mentioned at some point the fact that obviously as a financial institution you need to do fraud detection, and in the V4 land that's much easier to do based on good geolocation data and good IP reputation data. You mentioned the dearth of that information in the IPv6 world. Could you talk a little more about what the medium to long-term plan is for dealing with that reality?
Well, at the moment, part of it is the vendors that we use that make the fraud systems have committed to v6, and they're working to get us v6 versions. So that takes another 6 to 12 months to get it in, tested, certified, and then implemented. We're pushing a lot on all of the IP locations and Max Minds and all those people and nagging them going, how come this v6 data doesn't look very good? And just hoping that a little bit of groundswell will help. So if anyone else here wants to complain at any of the vendors, and again, encouraging anyone who wants to become a new innovator in that space, please do, because we would probably buy your service. That's the cool thing about the internet and v6, right? It will create markets wherever there's create a solution to a market. There's clearly a market need for better v6 geolocation data, and I'm going to argue we should be able to do more with v6 than with v4 because we get rid of a NAT layer, right? About a quarter of the things that connect to me are a NAT. It's a large-scale NAT gateway from the Verizon mobile core or whatever. I'd love to see all the way back to what it really was behind it. So I think there's a great opportunity there, and hopefully there's some innovators in the room that want to jump on that, or some people that work for some of the geolocator companies that go back and go, I think we better up our game. So that's the only answer I got. Anything you want to add on that one?
I was hoping there'd be more progress. It's the same issue several years ago.
Yeah. We haven't seen as much. What we're doing a lot of too is getting our security teams engaged, because they use a lot of those same tools, and they then have different relationships to go push on people from a different perspective. So the fraud side is a different side than, say, the information security side. So I got both of those people now pushing, complaining, doing geolocation mapping, going, in V4 I know that you're in St. Louis, but in V6 you're just flat in the middle of the United States. Why is that? So
I guess I would add, one of the early adopters is our digital channels group. They're at the forefront of working with us on instantiating v6 into their environment, and that whole fraud detection piece of it is the long pole in the tent, as they say. It is the piece that will push them out, because we have to have that rock solid before we'll even think about production.
Question over here.
Hi, thank you. Great information. The language you talked to the C-suite about, the simplification and making sure it's targeted and at the right abstraction level. I'd like to hear your thoughts about more on C-suite risk language, perhaps, instead of looking at just enablement or execution, but business risk. Do you have any thoughts on how we approach C-suite for that?
So I'll give you mine, and then Wayne can give you his. One of the ones that resonates for a large enterprise is IP address exhaustion. So when you say to them, you won't be able to build another data center, they get very interested. And that's actually the one thing the CIO tends to ask is, when we come to talk about v6, where am I at with v4? What does the exhaustion of that look like? And it's becoming a real issue for us, particularly with virtualization. We're seeing a much higher rate of server deployment. And a lot of the techniques we use now to make it go quickly is like pre-allocate. So someone comes and says, give me a /20 of space so I can do a lot of virtualization. That's a lot of registered space for us to chew up. So that's one area. The customer adoption part, one of the interesting ones, and this was pointed out, pretty much everything we're saying to you is stuff that we absorbed from previous things and are playing back. We found it successful and useful. So again, a big thanks here. Another one of the ones is just the idea of when do you want to jump in? And I've kind of pointed out to the web people, okay, when you turn on v6, if you just turn it on one day, 25% of all your transactions will probably jump to that protocol if it's a year from now. And they kind of go, wow, that sounds like a lot of risks. And so then you say, well, maybe we should be doing it sooner than when we don't have to do it that way. And we're already talking about things like, the World IPv6 Day. Do we have a Wells Fargo IPv6 Day for things like our property just turned on for a day, back it out again to see what's happening? But I think The adoption risk is part of what leadership can resonate with is, can I gradually get into something, the financial risk of having to spend a lot, the risk of turning on a lot of stuff. That's a way to get them interested in the conversation, because if they believe that this is ultimately where they have to end up, they want to find the easiest, shallowest ramp up into it, and they'll look for opportunities to do that and start supporting this. When you say otherwise it's a big bang, CIOs, C-level people do not like big bang proposals.
Right. Yeah, I would agree completely with that. We've tried to take the approach that while we have the benefit of time, let's not squander that opportunity. Let's work at a steady, risk-conscious pace so that we're not forced into a position of having to hurry up later. The other thing I would say that really works in our favor as the program team is Wells Fargo is what's called a global SIFI. I don't know if you're familiar with that term. It's a systemically important financial institution. And one of the happy outcomes of that is that projects and programs and spends over a certain dollar threshold are automatically scrutinized by the OCC. So every quarter when our leadership sits with the OCC, they have to report how we're doing with IPv6 because it's on the radar. So we don't really have to talk a lot about the risk equation because of that. It's just a matter of how do we do it in the most risk-averse manner.
I think we need to wrap up at this point, but again, want to thank everyone. All of our success is largely based on the community of the willing. Even our measurements, hats off to Jeff Houston for the widget he posted, right? It's things like that we've taken advantage of. The vendors that are willing to talk and shout out for Infoblocks, rock solid stuff from what we've done with V6. A lot of the vendors' products have actually been a pleasant surprise that they do V6 and they do it well. So anyway, appreciate it, and we'll be around if you want to catch us at lunch. We love talking to people and kind of hearing what you're doing and what you've learned. So thank you.